Okay.
All right. We should be recording now, Sal. Thank you for joining me once again. For those who don't know, we had some technical difficulties on our last recording, and my lack of expertise, my faded IT skills have sadly not been as good as they could have been. So thank you for your patience with me.
Okay. Is it a video podcast or oral?
Yeah, it is a video podcast, Sal, so everybody can see us. Basically, I like to do the video stuff because, let's face it, with think like Bagwajong, and you're going to show palm shapes or something like that, or like hand movements. A lot of times I'll have people get up and say, "Hey, it's like this," and that's what I would prefer to have for people, so that they can see a visual example of what we're talking about, if possible.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
So thank you once again for joining us. And, I found you online through, I think first Empty Flower and then Rum Soaked Fist, once we all moved over there after that shame. And, I've seen you post online through the years, and we connected on Facebook, and I'm really grateful for your time today. I've been trying to reach out to students of really legitimate masters in North America, particularly has been my focus. And you've studied with some of the top people here in North America. So if you'd like to briefly kind of outline who you've studied with in the past, I would greatly appreciate that.
Okay, well, first, when I was, for 30 years, I worked at Bell Labs, and there was a Kung Fu club, and people from all over China would work at Bell Labs. Sometimes they'd be there temporarily, but everybody would join this Kung Fu club, and people would exchange information. So I learned a lot of Shaolin forms that way first. And then later I became the person running it for the last maybe 10 years of it. And then they basically shut down Bell Labs. So that was the end of that. But during that time there was one of BB Chan's students, Warner Ollie. He taught Chen Tai Chi over there. So I learned that from him. In New York.
Briefly, Sal, was that the Du Yuze material, the Chen Yan Shi?
Yeah. So it was different than regular Tai Chi and Chen Tai Chi. And I didn't like Chen Fake based Tai Chi. It just seems something about it that bothers me. And being that I learned a lot of Shaolin, and I did 30 years of research for my book, the Taiwan Tai Chi that came from Chen Fake's father, basically, it was closer to Shaolin. I mean, I can find every move and tell you where in Shaolin it comes from. And the same with the old Yang. There's an old Yang from Tian Xiaolin. I mean, he taught more than one version of that, of the old Yang, long form, but it's a medium frame. And that too, every move, I can tell you what Qigong it's from. And it's amazing how it overlaps like that. So who else did I study? I studied Northern Kung Fu stuff from Greg Pinney. And the most important thing is when I started with two people, Chi Young Lin in New York City, where I learned everything, like all the different kinds of Tai Chi and different kinds of Tung Bei Tai Chi, Tung Bei, Chuo Jiao, Lan, weapons forms. I learned 20 years worth of stuff with him. And then I also, when Bruce Francis first came back from China to New York, I went to every one of his seminars. So I got to know him from way back then. And that's since the 1980s, right? So those are the main important people. I mean, I learned the Wu-Tang style from Charles Chen, and he died unexpectedly.
I'm sorry to interrupt. The Wu Tang style, is that the one that Dan Doherty represented, the Wu style, or is that from the Wudong Mountain, like a priestly style?
The one that went to Taiwan, and that was a pretty famous school. And they taught praying mantis, and they taught Tantoi, and they taught Chen Tai Chi, and they taught.
The Luyan Chao school, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So I went there too. I mean, I have a book that's 200 pages of everybody I studied with, and I traced everybody's ancestry back, lineage, all the way back in the 1800s, 1700s. All these different teachers overlap, and they all come together. And so it's interesting. The Shaolin lineages overlap, and it goes back to 3 people, and then all the other Bagua, Tai Chi, Xingyi, everything overlaps to the same group of people. So I tried making charts, and I was like, all the boxes and lines were going. I go, forget it. Put it into text. I just wrote down who taught what to who, and then who their teachers were, and the history of each one. So it's a nice thing to have. I mean, I just have it for myself. I don't publish my lineage, and people are like, who cares? It's not my lineage. Right. So, yeah. So that's pretty much gave me a broad background. And that made me see how patterns were crisscrossing. And that's what made me realize, hey, wait a minute. This all comes from a central source, right? And the one really important thing that I think I came across, besides that, a lot of what you see as Xingyi comes from the Yufei style. And in my book, I should give the title, The Hidden History of the Chinese Internal Martial Arts, right? You can get it on Amazon. Well,
I'll have a link to it in the description for anybody who's interested for you.
I invited other people to prove me wrong, or to prove whatever they want to prove, but to do their own research. So I've had people say, okay, I used the methods to do Southern Shaolin and stuff, but that's not what I was looking for. But I forgot his name. He does. I mean, he has a whole bunch of booklets that he does on. He translated all these books, Chinese books, into English. Well, he reviewed my book on Amazon, and then
Were you referring to Joseph Crandall?
yeah, that's it. Thank you. I'm still foggy from the medication that I was detoxifying from. Yeah,
Understandable.
he did what I said, and then he found in my book I showed a Yufei form that all the moves were really clear. That Zinyi, Zinyi version of Xingyi, let her, right, the 6th harmony, the one from Loyang. It was using the animal forms from there. So then what Joseph Crandall found was another Yufei form where all the animal forms are like Xingyi from Beijing. And so he was like, well, what can I say? They look like you're doing this. It looks very similar. So that idea, that people can do the research, once you got a clue, it's like a giant puzzle. You got to look at who taught what, who, when, and where. I did a presentation online for Beijing University about using anthropological methods to get to the truth in what the history is, and not the mythical or the lineage stuff that they pass on, but it's just myths. So, and then when you do that, you can find out again who taught what to who, when, and where. And then I started seeing patterns, and I started seeing it, like in Bagua, for example, Deng Hai Chuan. Well, he was learning a lot of stuff from a lot of different styles, And his cousin was well known, it's documented that he learned from him. He was well known in the Six Harmony style in Beijing area, right, in Hebei province. So that brought in more ideas to saying, oh, I can see what he did to create Bagua, because of the foot patterns. There was a lot of the Bafan Xiao, and which was really popular in Beijing, right? And in the Hebei province where he's from. I mean, in the beginning, he wasn't from Beijing. I mean, he died there, but he wasn't from there. But wherever he was from, those styles were popular. And even Yin Fu, right? His first student. Okay. People automatically assume that his kicking style that he learned first was Tantoi. Why? Because they're just lumping it with Shaolin. It's not Tantoi. It's documented who his friends were. All his friends were Chuo Jiao, foot poking students. So when you look at his 62, 64.
And I've also read something about Yin Fu doing a snake style. Is that?
Yeah, I didn't find anything about that.
No.
What,
Okay.
people say that, but it's probably people who do snake style. What I found is because of the hand movements, it's like flat. But the Shaolin is flat that he practiced too.
It's a Buddha palm. Yeah.
Yeah, willow palm. It's called the ox tail palm. But anyway, we'll get back to the Shaolin connection. But the Chuo Jiao, okay, so that was very common, and all his kicking patterns were there. And when I looked at the 64 palm, I said, this is the whole Chuo Jiao system, just separated one at a time and made into a Bagua. But
You're referring to the 64 palms from Lu Duquan?
well, him too. He did the same thing. He was already a Yufei stylist and a Six Harmony stylist. He already was. So everybody thinks, oh, he does a linear Bagua. It's not linear Bagua. It's something he did first just to get you used to moving. So he just strung together the different techniques, the different moves, and you can see them. There's only that many techniques, right? So when you see the Yufei one, you're like, oh. So in my book, I showed it. I showed and then not only his, but then you go to Shantung province, and then the post heaven style of Bagua. That was all Chuo Jiao movements. They're all doing the same thing. So the Chuo Jiao became the maybe foundational. Bafan Xiao is foundational. But when I looked at all these forms, let me stand up and show you something. Okay. So you know the classic Bagua pose?
Like Green Dragon Presents Claws.
Yeah. Well, in my book, I show that, but it's not Bagua. It's somebody who doing Bafan Xiao, right? So, and the stepping patterns are the same idea. Turn your foot out, turn your foot in, by Ko. So now when we get back to Shaolin, what Deng Hai Chuan did, in Shaolin, the Lohan style, it's a tornado traveling in a straight line. So when you're doing everything, you're doing things.
I'm sorry, Sal. The video doesn't seem to be able to handle the movement as well as I was hoping.
All right, I'll sit down. But
it's been freezing up a little bit. You're too fast for the camera.
Right. So, but Shaolin is the symbol for the Lohan is the null circle with a line through it, and that's supposed to be a circle traveling in a straight line. Okay, and the foot patterns are like Bagua, except inverted. So when he comes to Bagua, he turned it the other way around, moving in a straight line in a circle. He just inverted it. Then I found these forms. There's only one out of all those hundreds of Shaolin forms, one style. It's called the 18 hands. Everything's done with open hands. All the other Lohan forms are done with fists, open hands. And the movements are like the first form, it's very obvious, just done a different style, but it's still idea. Single palm change, double palm change, third palm change. And I found the single palm change, third palm change, first palm change, single palm change, double palm change, third palm change, everywhere. It was in so many styles. I'm like going, oh, this is the most common 3 ideas. That's why that's the only thing that every Bagua system has in common. The 3 palm changes. After that, it becomes whatever the person originally learned. So
Right.
in my first chapter of my book, I go through all the different Bagua styles and where the things originally came from and why, and which ones were based on Shuo Jiao, which ones are based on whatever styles. And I prove that the Bafan, no, not that one. That other one that they were saying there was this rival Bagua style, Bapan Zhang, right?
Oh, Yin Yang Bao Pan Zhang.
I proved that was all made up. It was really clear. I mean, all the Yin Fu people told me that that's made up. But when I really looked at it, it's bullshit. And it's definitely not true. So
I believe it was Devlin Horneck who was talking about it's possibly descended from like the unicorn system of Bagua.
yeah. Well, that's the other thing. This particular Shaolin form with the flat hands, it has the Bagua Yin Fu animals, and they're not found in any other Shaolin form. Bear, unicorn, they're all in there. So, and the unicorn step is the same. And I show that.
There seems to be a common thread in the internal Kung Fu theory of the wuxing, either 5 elements or animals, and then Bagua and maybe a 12. This style, they might have a different set of animals, little bit different from lineage to lineage. Maybe turtle and so forth. When I look at these things, coming from like a tantric Buddhist background, it looks like the Tongka for the astrological system. So they'll have like Mara, and there's the wheel of life, and there's the 8 trigrams in the post-heaven arrangement, and then 12 animals on the outside of that, and then the 3 protectors of the world, and so forth. So I can put a link to that Tibetan artwork up there, and I think it's pertinent because there was a huge tantric revival going on in the late Qing era, where the Manchu rulers, practitioners, would try to insert these things into the warrior arts that they had learned. Have you had much background in the more esoteric Buddhism and Taoism to inform that?
Well, as far as studying it, I have, but I haven't incorporated it into the martial arts research because other people were doing it, and I figured I don't need to.
Right.
Because there's the guy that wrote those books about how you can find so much of the material in the opera, Chinese opera.
Yeah, that would be Scott Park Phillips, I believe. His
yes,
but he's very much focused on the opera side of things, and I feel like there's more esoteric societies, both spiritual and criminal, that are associated to the martial arts than actors, although actors were often part of those societies.
Yeah, his book goes into where the spiritual material came from. I mean, he does talk about it. When I remember reading the books, I also got a series of books started coming out 2 or 3 years ago. They were historical and had a lot of stuff. Everybody looks at that mayor, what's his name, that did that Shaolin book, and
Shahar.
Yeah, it's the same old story. He didn't discover anything new. He discovered the same old story that, Shaolin is limited. That's not true at all. So these other history books have a much deeper there was two of them. One martial arts in Chinese culture, one is Shaolin in Chinese culture, and historically, and they're hardcover books. They're kind of expensive. I think some school uses them as textbooks, and it really showed there was a very deep connection historically. There was a whole bunch going on, and the one thing that I proved, which I can't stand up and show you, but I could. They were saying that Shaolin only is known for its staff forms. Okay, well, they were going there during the time when it was forbidden for Shaolin to practice empty hands, right? And so when you do the Qigongs, you can put a broom in your hand, and I teach it that way in my classes to help people understand how to do it better. So when you're just doing the normal Qigong, all the moves can be done with a broomstick or a staff. So whether you're doing this or you're doing this, the stick moves naturally. Whether you're doing white crane spreads its wings, whether you're doing cloud hands, the stick flows naturally. There's moves where you're spinning it around. So I'm like, when you do all the major techniques of the staff are hidden in the Qigong. And in particular, the Qigong that comes from the later, once the later period, let's say after 1600s. There's a big reason for that. So there's lots of Xingyi inside these Shaolin forms. So these Chen Yun Gong and Lohan 13 postures, they form the basis of Tai Chi. Every one of those moves can be found in Tai Chi, and every one of them can be done with the staff. And I have a video of me on YouTube saying, if that's true, then you should be able to do the Chen and the Yang form with a staff. And I did it. I said, I'm going to pick up the staff and do it right now for the first time. And I did the whole form with the staff. And I go, Shaolin, it's Shaolin. It's all Shaolin. So if you can do your empty hand form with a staff, it's automatically Shaolin based, because they did it to hide what they were doing, right? So they didn't want to lose their material. So now what happened was, after 1644, Ji Longfang, right, the founder of what they call Xingyi today, but it's not, what's it called? But then Xinyi, all right, Lehe, Six Harmony. He was learning Six Harmony Spear, and he incorporated the Six Harmony Spear techniques into his own empty hand techniques. Well, then he was visiting Shaolin. And then what he took from them was farmers' movements and animal movements, but not the 5 animals that everybody heard about. That's way later. That went to Southern Shaolin, and it's not the same. No, we're talking about rooster and things like that. Rooster, dragon, stuff that is what you see in a barnyard, right? So he incorporated those moves and adjusted his style, and they took his stuff and adjusted his style. And so that became the Xinyi Ba system at Shaolin. Now, his next generation, his students, went to Shaolin as well, and they exchanged more information. And one of them was from Loyang. One of them was from Loyang, but one of them was from Dengfeng village. And he's the one who really taught Ma Zuli. Now, not all these other stories and all these other things. It's very clear that he's the one that taught Ma Zuli, because the legend was that a wandering Taoist, right? But his nickname was Henan Li and Henlan Fu Li. So it's him, because Dengfeng village is right in the split in the middle of, and it's right near Shaolin Temple, and it's right near Chen village, and everything is right near where everybody would be passing through. So,
well, you know, I find it incredibly interesting that the Chen Tai Chi and 10 important points from Chen Xin is basically the same as the Xingyi 9.
right,
It's just got an extra bullet point, you know.
and you can see that there's Xingyi inside of Chen Tai Chi because it took it from the Shaolin that was influenced by Chen Tai Chi. All the silk reeling movements are Shaolin Chen Yun Gong. When I show it to people and I go, what am I doing? They go, Chen silk reeling. I go, no, it's Chen Yun Gong. So Chen Yun is a play on words. Chan, Chan, Chan means Zen, right? So Zen coiling movements or coiling practices. But Chen Yun, if you pronounce it a different way or use different characters, also means circular. So we're back to meaning coiling, which is silk reeling. Reeling is coiling. It's just another name for coiling. The character for reeling is the character for coiling. So it's just all different coiling movements that are done. Just now look at this one. This is the last one, the 10th one. You strike with your elbow, drop your elbow, go under your chin, open, come up, and go down. What is that?
Looks like Peach on to me.
Yeah. This is high pat the horse. Right? High pat the horse is this. So it goes under and high pat the horse. Boom. When BB Chan taught his version, he said, add this in before you do that. Because he also knew Shingi Bagua. So that I think he learned it in the Philippines. So
Learned from what was the gentleman's name? He just passed away. Liang Keqi, is that correct?
yes. Yeah, I think he was living in Boston. Yeah, he just passed away.
I got a chance to interview Ray Hayward on my channel before, and he trained with Liang pretty extensively, it sounds like.
Yeah. So a lot of stuff was camouflaged because
I'm sorry about that. My internet connection is not so stable right now.
yeah, I keep seeing you freeze every once in a while. You can blame it on the library. But a lot of history is
Yeah, it is. It is pretty bad.
a lot of history. I won't call it history. A lot of the misinformation is because everybody wanted to look important in all the old Chinese stuff, and they were making up tons of baloney. And even that historian Tang Hao, what a liar that guy is. I mean, there's so much baloney. And once I started really doing my research, it was like 30 years of research. I started seeing, these people are all making up everything. And now, what's the latest thing? Oh, that whole story about Yang Luchan, that was all from a novel. And he wasn't a servant. He was a martial art expert at the salt, at the drugstore in Beijing. And then they sent him over there. So he wasn't a servant. He wasn't any of that stuff.
I'm sorry, the internet cut out badly there. You're referring to Yang Luchan not being a servant, is that correct?
Yeah, they found out that that's from a novel. So now everybody's revising the history of Yang Luchan, saying
Using Unix? I'm sorry, I think the internet cut out here. But I learned recently that Yang Luchan's hometown, what we would call Guangping, it's been redistricted to Guangfu. Apparently in the late Qing era, that was considered, the top location to get Unix from. So that he was called a servant might just be that he's from Guangping and,
Well, no, but he had kids, so that.
Right.
No. So, no, but the thing is, that area was well known for the Shaolin Hongquan. And you can see the Yang version, it's almost the old Yang and the old Chen are very similar. And
yes, I'm a member of the Guangping lineage, and I did the Chen Fa Ke stuff prior. And, I moved over to the Guangping through Henry Look's side, and it's small frame. And there's a lot of stuff that looks very similar at times.
Yeah. Well, then the difference is the Yang stuff has some Hongquan Shaolin movements in it. And I have it all on my YouTube channel. I show the old Hongquan. It's a long form. It's not that short one that everybody in Shaolin does that just for show. It's not. I mean, don't forget, a lot of Shaolin stuff people see now, people go, oh, that stuff could never be. Because you don't see the real thing, the slow stuff. You don't see the Ro Chuan, R-O-U. That means flexible boxing. But they also have Qigongs that go with it. And you learn the Qigongs first, then you do the martial versions of the forms. And every one of those Qigongs can be done as a martial form, as a staff form, or a double sword. Because what's a double sword? a broken staff, right? You take the staff and it's in 2 pieces. Now you have double swords. So all those moves can be done. I used to show my teachers them, and then we would do them all, and they'd be like, "Wow, I don't know how you discovered that. You should write a book." So yeah, I mean that's, and then ultimately everything inside it has Shuai Jiao. I mean, it all,
Right.
yeah, ultimately that's the end of the last chapter. I do like it's a deductive. You're deducing this, and what came from where, and keep going through all the different styles and how they overlap and how it came in, and then poof. And even like Tung Bei. Okay, the founder of Tung Bei got together with the founder of what is known as Chen Tai Chi now, and brought in a lot of information. Okay, but what is it? It's spear done as a hand movement, and then it's Shaolin soft style. So this guy, the guy who founded Tung Bei, had 2 teachers from Shaolin Temple, and they learned the Hung Chuan system, and part of it was the emperor form, like Sung Taizu Chang Chuan, the long fist form, which clearly in Chen documentation that is in Chen Zin's book, right? That book that came out in 1926. It clearly says where we got everything from was the emperor form, right? I call it the emperor form, but it's Sun Taizu. It's shorter to say emperor form. Sung Taizu Hong Chuan, right? So on my website, I have a chart, and plus in the book, I have a chart of the whole Chen style and the Sung Taizu Chang Chuan form, and I show exactly where they are in parallel. Then I discovered, reading some material from the 1980s, these French historians had been traveling in China, and they came across what they thought was, they go, "What is this? This looks exactly like Chen Tai Chi." But it's a Shaolin form called XIE Chuan, which is brush knee twist step, right? The same XIE in brush knee twist step. So it means
So
slant.
that's the sideways fist, right?
When you do brush knee twist step, your foot is turned out like in Bagua, and you're doing slanted, right? So they had pictures in their books of the 2 styles and how they're parallel. And I also put that form in my website. So I have a 3-column chart. Chen, the I can't pronounce the XIE. It's Zhi Chuan and Sung Taizu Chuan. And the 3 are, when one starts, the other one stops. So you can see the whole form follows this Shaolin form note for note. And guess what? The only 2 forms in the world that have this, right? You know, the Chen thing when you go like this,
Right.
it's in both of those.
Hmm.
All the moves, if I showed you that form, you would think I'm doing Chen Tai Chi, a real primitive version of it. So it has the whole brush knee twist step in it, right? Brush knee twist step. It does that whole thing. It has white crane spreads his wing. It has high pat the horse. It even called the moves it called high pat the horse. It has the same names as the
And does it have like a linear single whip?
yeah, and also too, it has slanted. It has slanted single whip. It's only in those 2 forms is there slanted single whip. It has the one where you jump up in the air and then you squat way down with your hands like this.
Mm-hmm.
Only those 2 forms have it in the same place at the same time. The forms, if you follow them, they're happening. And all these Rao Chuan forms all repeat in the same place. You know how the Chen and the Yang form repeat? There's a second repeats. All these forms repeat the same material in the same way at the same time. So it doesn't. That's beyond coincidence. That's just fact that this stuff is so much exact. It's too exact. If you look at my charts, you'd be like, well, they're doing the same form. And if you see the videos, right, I could only find a few seconds of somebody doing it. I put it in my channel. Most of it's mumbo jumbo, but then all of a sudden there's a few seconds. I think 1 minute and 59 seconds into the video, he's doing that Shaolin form, and you could swear he's doing Chen Tai Chi. It's just an acrobatic version, and they consider Chen acrobatic. The Shaolin version is even more acrobatic, but it's the same moves. I mean,
right. Well, if you look at like the Hong Dong Tung Bei Chuan, I believe that one's what, Shandong province, Hong Dong village. It's the old Chen boxing set where the guy murdered somebody and had to get out of town, and you know, they still do all the handstands and the double kicks and, you know, all the Shaolin stuff. I found that really interesting.
That's the long form, the 108 long form that was written about in Chen Zin's 1926 book. But yes, they found it there, and then that old lady brought it back. She's dead now. Brought it back to Shaolin, and then one of those.
That was Chen Li Qing, right?
Yes, and then one of those Chen tigers said it was better if you never brought it back. You know, and I think that's how they talk to women.
Right.
Yeah. Now, also, I discovered there's other villages that practice forms. They're not calling it Tai Chi, but it sure looks like Chen Tai Chi. I mean, it's really.
Was it Adam Shu who found the Hule jaw?
Well, yeah, but that's a different thing. I wouldn't. That's a whole nother. Yes, he did, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in Wending County, which Chen Village is in. There's other neighboring towns that do Pao Chuan, and they do a long form, and it's not that much different from Chen Tai Chi. It's not. So it's got to be something that's based on this old Shaolin that was being passed around back then, right? But it's post 1600s. I used to think this stuff was all ancient. It's not ancient at all because it has a Xingyi influence. So everything is post 1644, right? When the Manchurians took over. And that's why in the 1700s, when people would visit Shaolin, all these generals, and go, I don't see them doing any empty hand forms. No kidding, because they weren't allowed, right? They weren't allowed. One of the emperors even went there and commanded them to show him a form, and they wouldn't do it because they're afraid it was a trap. But yeah, beg them and tell them, no, I'm not going to kill you. Just show me what they look like, just so I could see what Shaolin looks like. So they did it, and he didn't kill them, luckily. But so they were hiding it because they weren't allowed. So that's why they embedded it in the forms. And the Ziniba, pieces of it, that's the internal version, right? Pieces of it are hidden in other Shaolin forms, like the Tung Bei form, the Pao Chuan form, the Long, the Hung Chuan, all those different forms. There's not that many when you look at the real forms, when you look at the baloney forms. But the material comes from Shidi Gen. Shidi Gen, right? Degen, and Shi means monk, right? He brought this stuff over there. He learned Sung Taizu first, and when he was a kid, then he went to Shaolin, and then he got material from the neighboring villages. A lot of material. Like there's a town north of Shaolin. They do Shaolin from 1534 or something like that, right? It's that exact. And then Deng Feng village, guess what? The Li brothers, Li families from there, and they do Shaolin from the 1500s. And who are they? Well, he's the guy that massacred the 234 monks and killed them after he studied with them, right? Because he was doing a rebellion and he thought they would support the government. And who is his cousin that the government asked him to go to Dengfeng village and try to get him to stop? Chen Wengding. So, right? So it's plain in sight. And they were already, it overlooked Shaolin. So they went to the library and he looked at this stuff. So then, oh well, that's when the Shaolin influence must have came in to. They didn't call it Chen Tai Chi, right? To whatever long fist form they were creating. So you had Pao Chuan, you had Hong Chuan, you had the long fist form and the long form, 108, and then you had this one that they're saying was based on that. And even when I'm doing um, some of the Rao Chuan forms, I realize I'm doing movements from Chi Guang's book. And I go, wow, this is Chi Guang. This is from Chi Guang. This is from Chi Guang. I'm like, this is all embedded in this form. But they were saying, oh, Chen Tai Chi is really Chi Guang. No, it's not. It's obvious it doesn't follow it. But it because it comes from the Shaolin that came from it, then that's where it was found, right? So see that it's layers, and people don't understand the layers, and that's
Right.
miss the information. They get
And
confused.
it kind of depends on like what part of northern China they were in too, right? So like there's some differences between like Tianjin and Beijing and then the villages and
Yeah. Well,
some parts of Shanghai even have, you know, northern Chinese arts when they went south.
every time the government and Mongolians or whatever came in and they made the monks leave, and everybody had, then that's how Kung Fu spread into the Henan countryside. And from Henan, it went to Shantung province. And then now all of this originally comes from really, besides the Shaolin influence, is the plum flower. The plum flower, I would say, is really old. And even Bagua has a lot of material from the plum flower.
A lot of the stepping, like the nine palaces stepping practices, from what I'm told, come from plum flower.
Yes. And not only that, standing on the posts and doing the light work, that's all from there. And all the, and again, in my book, I mean, I do every layer and I show how even that came from there. Now, she's dead now. Everybody's older than me. So I'm going to be 63. She was in Princeton when I was living in New Jersey, and she was a historian about the Boxer Rebellion.
I'm sorry, what was her name?
I really forgot. It's
okay.
Phyllis something, or she's got books out. Somewhere in my bookcases, I got books about the Boxer Rebellion. So there's like 5 or 6 books about the Boxer Rebellion. But hers, I really learned a lot more from, because she analyzed the people's names that were on the written records of who was in the Boxers, and so many of them turned out to be Bagua people and plum flower people, and they learned it at the same time. So they learned plum flower first, then they learned Bagua. But the names she would find on the names, she found a whole bunch of stuff of these names that were overlapping with students of Bagua and students of plum flower.
And were these people that were like involved with, you know, quote unquote rebel groups or secret societies?
Yeah.
That she was finding there. Like, I'm sure her focus wasn't on the box or martial arts side of it, but more historical.
Right. But because she found out all that stuff, I was like, oh, that's that guy, that's that guy, that's that guy. I said, all these names are listed in Deng Haichuan's students list, because he had a lot of students. He had a lot more students than on the tombstone. I mean,
right.
it was like whoever paid them got their name on there, right? I mean, you know, that was all political.
Yeah, that was Li Ziming's group, right? That put the tombstone up. Yeah.
There was so many other people that learned material. So, and don't forget, he was also teaching before he was teaching Bagua. So
right.
He was Ohan, he was teaching the Sixth Harmony and all that. Now, going back to Sixth Harmony for a second, one of the things that bothers me in Xingyi history is they say Tai Ji Wu was the teacher of Mazuli and blah, blah, blah. And I don't think it's true. I mean, there's so many articles about the preface being a forgery. But here's why I think they made the mistake. In Hebei province, Kai Ji Wu is a famous six harmony martial artist. And they mixed up six harmony martial art with six harmony Lehuzini. See? From Loyang. But they mixed it up. And that's why they think that whoever forged the preface stuck his name there. Because he was a famous person. He was in the news. He was in the gazettes and stuff. There's no mention of him in the gazettes that he has anything to do with Xingyi. Only the Lehu style, which Deng Hai Chuan learned from his cousin. And they're all interconnected. Deng Hai Chuan's cousin's teachers are interconnected with the whole Lehe.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing I found really interesting when I've been looking into the history of Xingyi Chuan is, time and again, there's a lot of cross-pollination with other arts. So like you look at Tianjin and Xingyi Chuan mixed a lot with Wu Xing Tong Beichuan. You look at like Beijing, there were a lot of people that were mixing it with Bagua and Taiji. You look at farther south in like Shanghai, a lot of people were integrating concepts from Lehe Bafa into.
Right, which you can. Now here's the funny thing. 5 elements form, where did that come from? Right? Guess what I found? Shaolin 5 elements form, that's very similar. You're doing the same thing, especially the end where you're doing that leaping leopard thing, leaping dragon, so depending on what style.
The big cat goes up and down the tree backwards.
Right, that's there. The beginning is there. It's almost the same. It's different, but so somebody took that as a foundation, as a framework, and then added the Xingyi to it. So it was so obvious. Because why? These people learned Xingyi when they were kids. I mean, Shaolin when they were kids. Everybody learned Shaolin when they were kids. So it's common, and everybody goes, "Oh, Shaolin takes the credit for everything." Why are you giving? I go, Shaolin's not taking credit. I am giving them the credit because the material.
Before you would go on, is that correct?
Here it is. It's like, here's a plate. It's full of food, right? So, yeah, I have 2 books. Let me get them. They're right here. These 2 books are the most important books. They're out of print. This comes from Shidi Gen's lineage. So this has the bunch of forms, and this one. So that form, Xie Zichuan, is these people found their ancestor from the 1700s had learned the form, and he documented it. And that village still practices that form. So, and the ape monkey form is in here, and that's another big deal. That's part of the Raochuan system. But this book has the whole Z.
I'm sorry, did you say ape monkey form?
Ape monkey, which means gibbon, and the Chinese call the gibbon the ape monkey, or the monkey ape.
Okay.
So that's part of the whole Raochuan, because even that follows Tai Chi. It has single whip. It has this, right? So the Xie form also does that. Opens up to single whip, turns around, and does bang.
Right, that Buddha's attendant pounding mortar, it's a reference to Sun Wukong's skill at alchemy, right?
And these forms all do it in the same place all the time. The ape monkey form, the Raochuan forms, this form, the Ji Chuan, and then this book has the 5 elements form and a whole bunch of low-on stuff. But the 5 elements form is so similar that it's a joke to Xingyi. The ape monkey one's in here, but they fucked it up. 2 of the sections are inverted, because everybody I ever seen practice it doesn't invert the 2 sections like that. But who knows why they did that?
Well, there's always that kind of keep it hidden aspect of Chinese.
Sometimes it's just the layout person screwed it up.
Right.
is simpler. So yeah, this it's very funny how this Shaolin 5 elements form, it's called 5 elements. It's so much similar to Xingyi 5 elements form. Now what else is in this book, which is very important to a lot of other people, is the Lao Hung Chuan forms that came from the emperor. When the emperor Song Taizu was, Zhao Kuan-yin is his real name, right? When he was wandering before he became emperor, um, he was in Shanxi province, right? And he was learning Hung Chuan, which is Shanxi is very famous for Hung Chuan. Now they practice the Song Taizu Chang Chuan form now that they got. But anyway, he saw a Shaolin monk doing Ro Chuan. I'm not good at pronouncing Chinese. I can translate the right written word, and I can't pronounce. That's because I'm Italian. I speak Italian. The words mix me up. Rou, right? So he saw a monk doing that, and he could not defeat the monk. He could not defeat the monk, no matter how much younger he was. He followed him all the way to Shaolin and explained everything. And then they took his Hung Chuan and their Rao Chuan and merged and made 4 forms called the Lao Hung Chuan system. It's 4 forms. And it's different than the Da Hung Chuan and Xiao Hung Chuan. It's different. So it does not have a Tai Chi look to it like Xiao Hung Chuan, which is what probably Yang Luchen learned when he was a kid. So it doesn't look like it, but it doesn't look like anything except Hung Chuan merged with Rao Chuan. So, but still, that material is important. It's once that stuff's dead, it's gone for good, right? So, you only can find these kinds of forms in the villages around Shaolin Temple. Shaolin Temple became like an acrobatic show, and they had
tourist trap, right?
well, they had well, because of me, I was writing all those articles in Kung Fu magazine, right? The one from Pacific Rim was putting out, and I was doing all those history articles, and they were publishing them all. And then Shaolin Temple suddenly, because of those articles, everybody wanted to go there, and they were letting in people from Holland. They were making millions of dollars, they told me. And the head abbot, he published a group of booklets, and he did the forms that I liked the most first in gratitude. And I sold the Shaolin Encyclopedia. I must have sold 100 copies of the encyclopedia for them, which they told me, it was $400 here. That was like a year's wages over there, So they were making a shitload of money. Then the United Nations designated them as a world treasure, Shaolin Temple, and then all this other stuff. So first the government was trying to find out who I was and want to know who I was talking to, and they were trying to actually break into my computer, and they didn't succeed. But there used to be a program called Zoom, that was like prevented people from getting into your computer, but it would tell you where it was coming from. And
it's like a firewall.
The Ministry of Information from China was trying to get into my computer, and it would tell me who it was. So I was like, well, I go, you guys are nuts. So one person told me he got his Kung Fu magazine confiscated by the government. And then the abbot told the government, cool it off. This guy's telling the truth. We don't need to go with the old legends that are wrong. People want to hear the truth. And that's what's attracting them here. And that's why we're making so much money. Whether they bought him a Cadillac and they gave him silk socks. You know what I mean? So, money talks, right? But right. If it wasn't my articles that was started in the early 90s, nothing would have happened. So it goes around and around, around and around.
Well, thank you so much for your efforts in helping all of this stuff get out there in proper, truthful fashion. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Sal, you mentioned when we talked prior that there was like gazettes and stuff that you had tracked down, like who was advertising certain classes and that sort of thing. Is that correct? Is that how?
Yeah, well, the local gazettes, you could do interlibrary loans. They just show you photocopies and stuff. And you got to give them back. uh, they will tell you who was teaching in what area when. And the gazettes, real historians use the gazettes to find out the real people's names, the real, because you know, the legends, you change the wrong characters for people's names, all kinds of the wrong names totally, and they mix people up. But you go with the gazettes, you find out all the real information, and that's how you can find out all the stuff. Who was teaching Deng Hai Chuan, and who those teachers of teachers were, and that whole area. There's lots. They were meticulous with keeping records of stuff. So it became looser after, I would say, after Yang Luchan's time, because he's not found. You know, he's not found in anything at all, except for stuff about Tai Chi, but no gazette, no historical document, nothing mentions him. There's some people saying, well, the Wu brothers made him all up. They go, he was a person that they knew, and they added all the information onto him to make him sound like a big deal. And then they taught his sons, and I don't know, that sounds crazy, but once now everybody found out that the whole story about him being a servant is just a novel, you know, then anything's possible when it comes to Chinese bullshit, right?
Well, you know, I'm in Kenny Gong's lineage, and most of the stuff that I learned about Xingyi through my seniors in the lineage, I would qualify as bullshit now. You know, I can't tell you how many stories about Yue Fei teaching Kenny Gong I heard, and I was like, this just doesn't add up. You know, like Yue Fei's been dead for centuries, guys. Like, come on.
Now, here's the thing that I wrote about in my book. Why everything is attributed to Yue Fei. Easy. When his soldiers were let go, they had nothing they could do except teach martial arts. And the material that comes from Yue Fei's soldiers, that's the right way to say it. That's the stuff that looks like the Xinyi animal forms and the Xingyi animal forms. That all comes from Yue Fei's soldiers. I don't know about him directly, no, but and then in Henan you have a lot of people who learned the Yue Fei stuff in the local villages, and Jared, you know, what's it in Kaczynski, you know, he's got that website. He's got a lot of material about that, about how there's a Yue Fei overlap through the descendants.
I'm sorry, my internet went out there. Which website? I apologize.
Oh, Jared's website.
Oh, Yarek Samansky.
Yeah.
China from Inside. It's great, isn't it?
That has a lot of stuff, and even and a lot of that stuff is, you know, it's nice to see that stuff that I researched on my own overlaps with him. And then Kang Ji Woo, remember he did his PhD paper on the history of Bagua, and then he found all the styles that the moves all come from. Yeah, I found out the same information. Then it comes to a point where he didn't like what the truth was, so he left it out. He wanted to say, oh, the Bagua comes from the Taoist, you know, circle walking meditation. It was already, no, he's smarter than that. He didn't copy that. He created it by putting two and two together. And in my book, I lay out the steps and how he did it, what he learned and all the different styles he learned, and what you can find in Bagua and why it's there. And then it all makes sense. It all totally makes sense after you look at those details. It's all details. So, yeah, then it gets back to Taiji Wu not really being the guy that went to, because the Shaolin has its own records, and it shows after Jilong Feng came there, then his students came there, and who learned from him at Shaolin, and they passed on, and they passed their information, and they passed the information all the way up to CD Jen. It's got it all in the Shaolin Encyclopedia. The whole thing is there. And before he died, also, I talked to them, the guy who created the Shaolin Encyclopedia. And so the whole lineage is there, and it shows they went to Luoyang from Denfeng village, and they met up with Ma Zuli, and that's where it came from. So it's directly and indirectly from Shaolin, but via Jilong Feng's students and grand students. So that's who taught Ma Zuli. And then you look at the material, and then it all makes sense, right? The material all makes sense. So it's very clear when you look at the Raochuan system what comes from Xingyi. But see, if you only learn one style, you won't know anything. You have to be like all the old masters. You got to have Shaolin as a foundation and Shuai Jiao. And then you got to have all the Northern Kung Fu stuff like Chuo Jiao and Baji and so on. And then Tai Chi, Xingyi, Bagua. And then you can see how it all fits together. Because that was the background of all these people, right? That was the background of all these people. They learned, and so they weren't dumb. They saw, well, let me teach you this because you'll see why later, right? When I teach Tai Chi now, I start with Shaolin Raochuan system. So we learn those 4 or 5 forms. And then when they do Tai Chi, they're like, oh, this is everything you taught us already, you know? So I have an 80-year-old lady that I was teaching her for 10 years Qigong, and I was doing those Shaolin Qigongs. And she said, you know, I learned Tai Chi like 20 years ago, and I would like to do it again. So I said, well, I already basically taught you it. You take the Qigong and lay it on top of the form. And then I showed her, and she's like, oh, wow, we already learned all this. I'm like, yeah, you know. So, I mean, the commencement is the same in Raochuan. We have the old Yang does this. Which is sometimes called the 4 elements. It's the same opening to the Raochuan 36. There's Raochuan 36-1 and Raochuan 36-2. There's 2 forms, right?
So you see like the Guangping system and the Wu guys, they open up and then they go like this. We would call it strike palm to ask the Buddha. There's a few other ways to call this. What would that opening be descended from, do you think?
Well, look, the Raochuan does this first. Circles up, comes down like this. Then you build up your internal chi, and your hands get real hot. And then you open your wrists, and you push through yourself. Then you do the commencement. And this is classic Buddhist stuff.
Right.
In every Buddhist form. So that's why Guangping makes sense, because it's got the Hengchuan influence, right? So even the Lao Hengchuan, not the Sung Taizu Lao Hengchuan, there's there's Lao Xiao Hengchuan, okay? That starts out, and you're doing a lot of the movements that you see. All these forms, you know what they have in common? You do one thing on the left, then you go to the right, and you do something that looks like grass the bird's tail, and then you do white crane spreads its wings, and then you do. So they all have in the same pattern. They all do. Now Lohan Shaolin does everything on the left only, and all the forms go that way. Not so with all the Raochuan forms; they go to the right. So what does Tai Chi do? Go to the right, because they all do one thing on the left and they all go to the right, right? So yet again, more things that are beyond coincidence, right? I mean, history is fascinating when you can actually learn the truth and not mumbo jumbo. But then you're right, there's so much mythical stuff in the movements, like, okay, we can say historically, the Chen and the Yang style comes from Shaolin. Okay, because the movements are the same. But the movements of Shaolin, where do they come from? Right? Well, there's a lot of Buddhist stuff that's for emotional thing. There's worshiping stuff, right? The Bodhisattva, the Qigong, right? The golden
Right.
diamond warriors. So there's 4 of them. The Emperor form does this 4 different ways, 4 times in the same places where Chen would do it. So they all have this. There's too many coincidences. The ape monkey form does that too. The Z twin form does that too. So this is one of the moves in the Low on 13 postures from Rao Chuan. So a lot of the moves in the 13 postures are like Chen. A lot of the moves in the Chen Yun Gung are like Yang. So that tells you something, right? There's some kind of mysterious thing in there. But then when you get deep into I have a lot of books about Shaolin. The movements, yes, you're right. They're based on mythical people, mythical things that are Buddhist deities and Buddhist saints. And a lot of
Buddhism, bodhisattvas, tathagatas, and so forth. Yeah.
they're the 18 Loan themselves, which were supposed to be 18 bandits that converted to Buddhism and then they became saints. So there, a lot of those hand movements come. But now you see them in Tai Chi. I mean, look, the old Yang goes like this, right? You don't see Yang Cheng Fu changed so much that it's ridiculous. If you learn, but right now Bruce Francis is teaching the old Yang, and he's up to he's been for 8 weeks and he's only up to single whip, right? So the original Shaolin single whip is straight arms. This one, you know how they'll say, "Oh, Tai Chi comes from Taoism." No, almost every move comes from Buddhism. But there's watch when Huashan Mountain has some material that overlaps with Shaolin Chen Yun Gong, and a lot of the moves are the same. But this one that you do in Shaolin Chung, right? It's done this way in Huashan, and then that looks like single whip. So they took this Shaolin single whip, which is just, you know what a single whip is? It's the stick that you put 2 pails to hold up water.
Yeah, the gun, right?
Right.
The walking stick.
Well, no. It's this for when you go get water or milk and you carry it. That stick holds the 2 pails. That's a single whip. So in Shaolin, it's just that your 2 arms are straight out from your body, right? Now in Tai Chi, single whip is this, right? You can see me, right? So that comes from this Qigong. See, that looks exactly like single whip. That's the one thing that I can say is a little bit leaning towards Taoism. I mean, don't forget, all these people made up all this stuff. Even Sun Wu-Tang goes, "Oh, everything comes from Wu-Tang." What is he talking about? I mean, he said Xingyi, Tai Chi, and Bagua all come from one. And then everybody put that in their head and like, oh, but he didn't mean it like technique. He meant it spiritually. Right?
Right, and there was also that big movement in the early 20th century of just let's appease Li Jinglin, the Wudong sword warlord, just to make him happy. So we'll just say everything comes from Wudong sword. We all studied with Li Jinglin at some point or another. It's all the Wudong art, right? Like let's make the political waves a little calmer here in the Central Goshu Academy, sort of thing.
That reminds me of something. He learned Tai Chi from, of all people, the Shuai Jiao champion, right? No,
he taught Tai Chi to Chung Dongsheng. He learned from Yang Ban Ho.
Right, he taught him, right? What's his name? Chung Su
Dongsheng, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad that you're.
Yeah,
I'm just having. I told you I went through all this bad mojo from medication. So,
it's
um,
understandable.
so okay. His direct student was one of my teachers, and he said that Deng showed him. I mean, Chong showed him everywhere in the Yang form that it's really Xingyi. And he said Xingyi is super Tai Chi. So you can. Why do so many Xingyi people learn Tai Chi? Because you can find the common ground.
Yeah, and one of the things I am a Xingyi guy, and then I switched to Bagua to fix my back, and so now I'm getting back into Xingyi again. Um, and so one of the things that I learned from David Block, who's a local Dong family representative of the Yang and Hao styles, he told me basically like if you're used to doing Xingyi, you might as well do bear mechanics if you want to do Yang style.
Yeah. Well, I, that's funny. Yeah. I so, you know. But you still have to go back to the original Shaolin that's inside the root of it to be able to maneuver between styles, right? You can maneuver between the Xingyi, Tai Chi, Bagua has the Shaolin as the thread that holds it to get the three of them together. So not only from their teachers over the generations learning Shaolin first, but because of the material somehow came from it.
Right. And like I look at my own lineage, descendant from Zhang Jiaodong just because of the snake step opening. Apparently that's something that Zhang Jiaodong developed in the 1920s. And it's kind of unique to his lineage. So like we can tell with that snake step that comes from that time frame. And a lot of the people that did that learned Shaolin, the northern Mizong Yichan, like Zheng Rongchao learned from his uncle Chen Yushan. I think you'd mentioned in the past that Zhang Jiaodong's family was known for Mizong Yi.
Yeah. And Mizong, I could see having some snake stuff in there. Yeah. Mizong has, it's a mixture of Shaolin and some local Shantung styles.
Okay.
We're going back to 1600s. It was like some military people got hurt. It's always the same story. A military person got hurt, and then people helped him get back together, and then somehow he mixed this Shaolin that he learned because there was a lot of monks that went to Shantung province to escape from the Manchurians. So now that's not counting the people from Shaolin that went south and created that whole style too, like Choi Li Foot, and that Choi was one of the relatives of. It's just the southern way of pronouncing it. Relatives of the king of the not non-Manchurian emperor. The Ming emperor. He was an uncle.
Well, Sal, I really wanted to thank you for your time. It's getting late where you are,
Yeah.
And our library here is going to close in just a few minutes.
Okay.
You've gone over a heck of a lot of material with us, and I'd love to have you on again. Hopefully our Wi-Fi here. Normally I'm doing this in the community college library, which has much better Wi-Fi, but they closed it for the summer. So
Well, everything I said is just to be thought-provoking, that I want people to find out what really is going on and not what everybody tells them is going on. Well, my teacher said. Who cares what your teacher said? Unless your teacher's a historian and really worked at it, like some teachers are. And then, so.
Right. And that is one thing that, I found in my own, lineage that, so far the history is kind of lacking. So I've had to kind of do my own stuff. being disabled, my mind is still working on this stuff. Sometimes when I can't, get up and move around and do active things, I'm in my bed thinking about how these things link together. And I'm sure you've done similar things with.
Yes.
And I feel like these things are important for us to understand, not just the physical disciplines, but the spiritual and the mental disciplines. If we're not doing the Buddhist body training, or I'm sorry, the Buddhist mind training and the Taoist body training in conjunction with these arts, we're kind of missing out on these aspects, which are really important.
Right. You're not getting a really fully actualized material. You're just getting a piece of it, and it's not the same. You're right. You need all three components. Maybe there's more than three to do that. Oh, my book, because they liked my presentation so much in China, is being translated from English into Chinese.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
There's a Zini Lehu master from China living in Canada. Him and his wife are translating it. Every once in a while, they'll say, "Oh, you had some Chinese misspellings." I'm like, ah. They're like, "You're gonna have to re-put your book up after we make the corrections."
Well, I think I would be more than happy to see a second edition out there, or third, whatever you're up to now.
Be second. Well, he was blaming it on the people who gave me the information. So, yeah.
You can only work with what you got, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Sal, I would like to thank you again for your time and for staying up late with me here. Your time's a little bit later than mine, and dealing with my crappy Wi-Fi connection. Thank you so much for all of your patience.
Thank you. Yeah, and people can check out my book and they can find out everything for themselves. They'll be surprised.
My Yichan teacher got your book and he found it very interesting. He didn't really have much to say. He's like, "Yeah, it's good."
Because it's a lot of stuff.
So,
you're looking,
it's what it is, right?
There, but it's a lot of stuff. Some people go, "Why did you repeat sections?" I go, "Because I don't want you leafing through me saying, go to page 210. I don't want you to do this. Big deal. I reprinted 3 paragraphs so you don't have to leaf through the book." Even Joseph Crandall said it repeats itself in some chapters. I'm like, yes, because I don't want you leafing through the whole book and forgetting what you just read. Just continue. I mean, sometimes the material overlaps. So I go, just continue reading and don't worry about it.
Right. Not everybody went to catechism or their LDS training for Bible concordance work. You might want to have the material right there.
Yeah, I don't mind repeating. Who cares? So what? I mean, he must have read the book all in one sitting for him to right?
Well, Sal, I'll be sure to have links to your book, your website, your YouTube. Anything else I should be sure to include in there on the bottom?
It talks about my classes. I do them online. I got people from different countries taking the Rao Chuan system with me. So, and they're always surprised. This is so much like Tai Chi. I'm like, yes, that's the point I'm trying to make. So it makes your better. I mean, I think if somebody's already an expert at Tai Chi and then you learn this foundational material, I think it will make you know why you do the moves the way you do in Tai Chi. And then you'll be even better at it, right? And that's the story. All right.
That's what we all want to do, is get better, right?
Yeah.
So thank you so much for helping us all get better. And
the Taoist way. I mix both everything I do. So.
All right, I'm going to hit the stop button here, and
good night.
Good night.